Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest virtual Headteacher assembly. I hope that you've had a restful and relaxing half-term break and that you've managed to hit the ground running today with your live lessons and assignment work on Teams, and that hopefully this will be the start of another extraordinary half-term, both for you as an individual, but also for us as a school community. So as we kick off this half term, I wanted to share my slides with you again today, as usual, for our weekly assemblies, and hopefully appearing before you now, you will be able to see a picture, and there's a question that links to the picture, and the question is, what do you notice about the picture? What is noticeable about this photo? Well, it is a photo, and it was taken over 100 years ago, back in 1919 in Spain. And you'll see a group of people sitting on the pavements and into the road. And these individuals are grouped together because they are a church congregation and they have arrived for their normal Sunday morning church service. What you'll probably notice, though, is that they are all wearing face masks, just like the face masks that you and I wear in COVID-19 in recent times. And that's what makes this photo really interesting. And I think that actually one of the most special things about it is that we can probably relate now to the people in this photo far more than we would have done even a couple of years ago. Because we now know what it's like to have lives disrupted, to have to change our habits, to have to wear face masks. These people were going to church during what was known as the Spanish flu back in 1919, another worldwide pandemic that killed many, many people. And you can see here that they're having their church service outside in the fresh air as opposed to inside. They're wearing face masks to protect themselves, but also to protect one another as well. But there's also something, I think, about hope in this photograph, because the people that you can see, the subsequent generations that lived in these towns and in Spain and across the world, were able to move on from the Spanish flu. Once it was controlled, once it was under control, the face masks went away. Once it was controlled, people were able to start socialising again. People were able to go back inside buildings for their church services. And it's a reminder that however difficult it's been in this most recent lockdown, that actually our lives will go back to normal at some stage when it's safe for them to do so. And there's going to be so much for us to look forward to when they do. For these people, the next 100 years went by without any face masks or new global pandemics. And that should give us all hope at this stage of COVID-19. And I wanted to start with that because it's likely that in the next day or so, you'll hear lots on the news and at home about lockdown easing and about schools coming back. Always, we listen to the government and wait for the government's guidance on what we should do and when we should do it. We're likely to get some guidance from the government later today, and it's Monday today. Once we've got that information, we will communicate with our parents and our students, but we will also carefully plan a smooth return to school for all of our extraordinary students. And above all, we will prioritise your well-being at all times. When you walk back through our doors and take your seats in our classrooms, our first question will be, how are you? How's it been? And what more can we do to support you in the days and weeks ahead? You may recall that at the start of the year, we talked about our COVID-19 strategy being called KHS Care. Because here at King Henry School, we care for one another, we look out for one another, we look after one another, and that will continue whatever the news is about school reopening in the next few days or weeks ahead. But whilst there'll be lots going on in the news about COVID and lockdown and schools returning, it's important that we also don't lose sight of other important things going on in society. And there's another picture on your slide now, and I wonder how many of you will know what this picture represents and why it's on the screen today. Well, this is an updated version of the Pride flag. It is, of course, in February of each year, LGBTQ+ History Month, a really important month and an annual celebration that provides education and insight into the issues faced by the LGBT+ community and the history of the gay rights movement. But above all this month, it's about trying to promote a more inclusive society for all of us here at school, but also in our community, across the country, and indeed across the world. because members of the LGBTQ plus community have often faced persecution, they've often faced insult, they've often faced oppression in our society and in other societies around the world. And what's remarkable about this community and the gay rights movement more generally is how recently some of those equalities and freedoms have been won, but only in recent years. And so until recently, so many members of the LGBTQ plus community faced real difficulties, and many still do. There are many freedoms yet to win. The traditional pride flag, the rainbow flag, has been redesigned in recent years to become more inclusive. So the black and brown stripes represent different ethnicities within the LGBT plus community, and the pink, blue and white represent the trans community, a community that's often overlooked when it comes to the history of LGBTQ plus and the members of the community. Just in the same way that we try and make sure that we are becoming ever more inclusive within our school, it's important to know where you're starting from first. So I wanted to go through a quick timeline about the gay rights movement as we reflect on this month. And as I said earlier, it's shocking, really, how recent some of the rights, equalities and freedoms have been won by members of the LGBTQ plus community. So it was as recently as 1967 that homosexuality was decriminalised. And even at this stage, that was only partial decriminalisation. That means that before 1967, it was against the law. It was illegal to be homosexual. In 1969, really huge historic moment in the gay rights movement took place. The Stonewall Riots occurred in America. These were riots by members of the LGBTQ plus community after police raided the Stonewall Inn, and police brutality towards members of the LGBTQ plus community was horrendous. And so it prompted this set of riots and protest for greater equality and freedom. In 1972, the first London Pride event took place on the anniversary of the Stonewall Riots, and around 2,000 people attended. The purpose of Pride marches is to demand greater equality, and also in recent years to celebrate the progress that has been made. And now they take place in cities across the country and across the world once a year. But think about how brave, how courageous in 1972 the first 2,000 people would have been who attended that first ever Pride event, just a few years after it was no longer illegal to be gay. These people marching through demanding greater equality and freedom still would have faced a huge amount of opposition in society, and yet they were brave enough to attend, and the event has grown successfully ever since. In 1988, there was a huge step backwards for the promotion of LGBTQ plus rights because the then government introduced what was known as Section 28. This meant that local councils and schools were not allowed to discuss homosexuality in any way through fear that it might be promoting it amongst younger people. This was horrendous and would have meant that the assembly that I'm giving to you today would have been against the law in 1988 and all the way through the 1990s. It also meant that loads of young people were not able to discuss LGBT history or identities or sexualities in any way at all within school. In 1988, Stonewall was also formed. Stonewall was probably the largest LGBT organisation in Europe, and it was partly formed to fight the unfairness of Section 28, but also to campaign for wider LGBT rights. In 1992, the World Health Organization declassified homosexuality as a mental illness. Shockingly, what this means is that before 1992, 30 years ago, the World Health Organization and many health professionals across the world would link homosexuality to mental illness, something that is unthinkable now and extremely unfair and wrong and grotesque. And yet until 1992, even the World Health Organization linked homosexuality to mental illness. Thankfully, between 2000 and 2010, That decade saw a huge number of steps forward for LGBTQ+ rights. In the year 2000, the ban on lesbian, gay and bisexual people serving in the army was lifted by the UK government. In 2002, same-sex couples received equal rights for adoption as straight couples. That horrendous Section 28 that would have banned this assembly was finally abolished in 2003. And in 2004, the Gender Recognition Act passed, which allowed transgender people to fully and legally identify with their chosen gender, something that had been illegal before. And in 2013, the first Trans Pride event happened in Brighton. Around 450 people took part, and it was the first of its kind in the whole of Europe. London's first Trans Pride March occurred in 2019 and saw more than 1,500 people attend. And it was only in 2014 that the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act came into effect, making same-sex marriage legal. Before 2014, people of the same sex were not allowed to get married. That's less than 10 years ago that has been allowed in our society. And then finally, and probably most shocking of all, in 2019, the World Health Organization declassified transgender health issues as a mental illness. So just like in 1992 with homosexuality, until 2019, just 2 years ago, the World Health Organization linked transgender health issues to mental illness. Absolutely horrendous. And as you can see there, thankfully, since that change, there's been a liberating effect on transgender people around the world who now are seen as not having mental health issues, but actually are seen as being empowered to have the freedom to choose their identity and to be their authentic selves. So it's been a long journey, but a relatively short one. Since the 1960s onward, all of these freedoms and equalities have been won in recent times. And as we look back upon those decades of the late 20th century, it's also important that we reflect on some of the key members of the LGBTQ+ community and actually consider their enormous impact and contribution to society. And throughout Right Here, Right Now this week, you'll be finding out about more famous members of the LGBTQ+ community. But I wanted to share just a couple with you now. This is a photo of Sally Ride. She was an American astronaut and engineer. She joined NASA in 1978 and became the first American woman in space in the early 1980s and remains the youngest American astronaut to have traveled to space, having gone into space at the age of just 32. Alan Chorin is someone who you may have heard about in recent years. He was an English mathematician and computer scientist, the first person to propose the idea of a computer program. Computer programs, of course, are things that we take for granted now, but he led a team that created the machine to crack the German Enigma code in the Second World War. That was a decisive moment that helped Britain and her allies to win the war, and it happened much quicker because of his hard work and contribution to the Enigma code effort. So he saved millions of lives by helping to end the war earlier. And yet throughout his life, tragically, his own country, our country, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, treated his sexuality as something that was illegal, something that was against the law. Finally, Bayard Rustin, an American leader in social rights movement for civil rights, non-violence and gay rights. He served as the organizer for the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech, the speech that resonated around the world and contributed so much towards the civil rights movement that brought about equality for black people in the United States, but also was a prominent activist for gay rights as well. So those remarkable, extraordinary individuals can inspire us to consider our inclusivity here at King Henry School. And I would remind you of the Inclusivity Pledge that we signed up to at the start of this year, 6 months ago. And it said this, that as a school, we pledge to prioritise, to champion and to be relentless campaigners for inclusivity and equality in our community. That our diversity would be celebrated, our students made to feel safe, engaged and empowered. And this pledge is something that I reflect on all the time, because I want our school to be a school where everyone is supported, but everyone is also celebrated, where we are extraordinary. And when we talk about being extraordinary, part of what we mean is about having the confidence and the freedom to be yourself, to be the authentic you. And that means that we have to start by looking at ourselves, and we need to reflect on how inclusive we are as individuals. How do we react to people who are different to us? How do we embrace difference, and how do we celebrate diversity in our school? And that includes for members of the LGBTQ+ community. And so I want to finish today with this final reflection, that being your authentic self is being extraordinary. When you are yourself, when you're not just trying to fit in with the crowd, when you're not just trying to blend in, when you're not just trying to copy other people's behavior, but when you have the courage to be you, whatever you is, that is extraordinary, because each individual is unique. And when you've got the courage to be yourself rather than pretending to be someone else, then you are being extraordinary, because there is only one version of you. So the message today is to be you and to be proud. And I think that is probably the most important message from this month of LGBTQ plus history, because it is a month where we, yes, look backwards, but also consider our role in ensuring an inclusive society, equality and fairness in the years ahead as well. So lots to think about on that screen, and I hope that that is something that resonates with all of us as we reflect on our inclusivity and the role that we play here at King Henry School to be that truly inclusive school. I will probably be back in touch with another video message later this week, once we have got more guidance around school reopening, and when I'm able to give Year 11 and Year 13 students more information about the latest government guidance on the grading of GCSE, A-level and BTEC qualifications this year. But in the meantime, I hope that today has gone really well, and I hope that the rest of the week goes well for you with your remote learning. Keep working hard, keep being extraordinary, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.